The Galactic Accord had never feared silence until the day two death worlds stopped ignoring each other. It started in the Outer Rim, on a desolate mining moon under the rule of the Virex Dominion. Known for brutality and profit, the Virex specialized in crushing descent beneath plasma-tipped boots. But this time they picked the wrong rock. A distress signal escaped during the massacre. Faint, untraceable, and desperate, it wasn't meant for saviors. It was meant for anyone. Two ships responded. One bore the jagged blood-black insignia of the Karen brood. No one had seen it in 50 years. No diplomats, no emissaries, no negotiations. Just a cold myth of reptilian giants bred for war and silence. The other came from Earth's Outer Defense Fleet, a Terran vessel designed not for diplomacy, but for impact. A destroyer-class ship known as Shatterpoint. When it dropped out of subspace, sensors glitched across 5 sectors. And then, for the first time in recorded galactic history, humans and Icarans looked at each other. Without orders to fire, the Virex were still sweeping through the last of the labor camps when the ground began to tremble. Human drop pods hammered into the crust like meteors. Icaran flyers tore across the dust storms, talons slicing air and gravity alike. But no shots crossed between them. Instead, they began working in perfect sync, as if the chaos had already been choreographed. The Accord watched in horror. At first, it was chalked up to coincidence, a tactical convergence, a temporary overlap in targets. But the Virex's command chain was dismantled with surgical precision. Communications scrambled, orbital cannons fused, their captains locked inside their own control chambers before the oxygen was vented. And when the last of the Virex fled the system, a single broadcast echoed from the surface. "We remember those who devour the weak." The message was signed by both. On Vantoros Prime, deep inside Accord intelligence chambers, panic spread faster than protocol. The Karen language had no translation software, yet the humans spoke it fluently. That meant contact had occurred before, off-grid, untracked, and now a new phrase entered the diplomatic lexicon: kindred. Among the Karen, that term meant something ancient, not ally, not equal. It meant never prey. The last species the Karen labeled kindred had gone extinct 2,000 years ago. Instead of conquering them, they buried them with honor. Entire fleets had vanished to guard that grave world. The humans had not just earned the Karen's respect. They had triggered an oath older than most civilizations. Across the stars, empires rewrote their defense codes. Border worlds initiated forced evacuations. Systems unaligned to the Accord turned to ghost protocols. No one wanted to be next, but the Alliance had already moved. The next target was the Virex trade world of Carthan, a hub known for its slave markets disguised as industrial auctions. When the Shatterpoint arrived, Carthan's defense grid activated immediately. Orbital mines, gravity sinks, a wall of automated destroyers. It should have been a slaughter, but the Karen had already arrived. From beneath the city's own crust, they erupted, silent, coiled, and merciless. They tunneled through molten rock just to bypass security layers. One by one, systems failed. Shield dropped. Power vanished. And above, the Shatterpoint never fired a single shot. It only hovered, watching. A signal was broadcast on every frequency. Lay down your arms, or they won't need permission. The slaves were freed. The warlords were captured. None of them were executed. They were handed to the Accord, alive, silent, and deeply broken. Every one of them had one story: how they Karen whisper human war poetry before entering the room, and how it was the humans who had shown mercy. No demands were made. No colonization followed. No claims were staked. They left as suddenly as they came. But everywhere they went, the map changed. Borders redrawn, governments toppled, fleets scattered. In the Accord's war chambers, simulations ran day and night. Nothing made sense. No economic motive. No imperial pattern. Just precision, like a scalpel rather than a hammer. The Alliance wasn't invading. It was cleansing. The most terrifying realization wasn't their power. It was their coordination. Two species with nothing in common. Biology, culture, atmosphere, working seamlessly, like instinct and that scared the galaxy more than any weapon. Speculation boiled over. Had they met in secret decades ago? Were humans always as calculating? Or had they simply recognized each other as something the rest of the galaxy could never be? Worse still, they didn't speak to the Accord. Not once. No diplomats. No warnings. Just silence followed by change. Rumors emerged from shattered outposts of Ikaran and human soldiers drinking together, trading survival stories, practicing each other's martial forms. One report claimed an Ikaran general knelt before a Terran commander, not out of submission, but out of something deeper, a shared promise. They don't want the galaxy, a captured Virex admiral muttered before execution. They want it healed or burned. And yet, nothing about Earth suggested a plan like this. Earth was fragmented, loud, emotional. The Ikaran were disciplined, honor-bound, one a mess of passion, the other a cold forge of instinct. But together, they had become something else entirely. They became inevitability. Systems untouched by war began pledging loyalty preemptively. Some offered fleets, others tribute. One system shut down its own government and sent an open message. We have wronged the helpless. Judge us. But judgment didn't come. Not yet. On the edge of the Lurith expanse, 3 Accord vessels stumbled across a derelict station. Inside, Virex propaganda archives, torture files, and experiments run on hybrid species. Instead of destruction, the Alliance had copied the files and sent them anonymously to the victims' worlds. The message was clear. We want no throne. We want no crown. We only want memory. Even as planets celebrated liberation, fear lingered. What happens when no more tyrants remain? What would they do next? Because if the Ikaran and humans had found purpose and justice, then what would happen if the galaxy failed to maintain it? The question was never answered, only deepened. When the Alliance vanished again into uncharted sectors, everyone waited and prayed, not for salvation, but for forgiveness. The obliteration of the Jurgathy Syndicate was an assault. It was a quiet erasure. One moment, the Jurgathy fleet stood as the largest private armada in the galaxy. The next, they were simply gone. No explosions, no debris, no distress signals. The entire moon station network that used to traffic millions into labor vanished from the star charts. Every ship, every overseer, every databank. It took days for the Accord to confirm it wasn't a malfunction. The only trace was a single artifact found drifting where the Jurgathy core hub once orbited. A Terran coin, engraved with 2 marks. One was a Terran eagle, sharpened into a spearhead. The other, a single Ikaran claw, curved into a spiral. No message, no demand. The council panicked. Analysts scrambled to understand the pattern. But it wasn't a pattern. It was a philosophy. The humans and Icarans didn't kill unless forced. They didn't linger. They removed corruption at the root and then moved on. That restraint made them more terrifying than any conqueror. Within weeks, similar disappearances followed. The Brel Vortex Syndicate collapsed in under an hour. Their orbital minds deactivated from the inside, and their leadership was paralyzed with a neuroagent the Accord didn't even recognize. Footage leaked showing an Ikaran hunter walking silently through the control chamber, dragging chains behind him. Behind him, a human in armor walked barefoot, whispering into a child's ear. The child was the daughter of a kidnapped governor. She had been missing for 8 years. They returned her to her mother with no ceremony, no interviews, just coordinates and silence. That silence echoed louder than any speech. The Accord's defense circle called an emergency vote. Proposal 7709. A. Declare the Ikaran-Human Pact a class-red existential threat. 39 members voted against. 270 abstained. Not out of indecision, but out of fear. The moment a vote passed, it became an act of war, and no one wanted to be first. Yet every data point showed something even more baffling. When they struck, they never claimed resources. They extracted no wealth, didn't occupy space, and didn't alter planetary laws. They left each system freer than before. Even more stunning, across 7 known liberation events, not one civilian death was recorded. Their military precision had crossed into the impossible. Some believe the humans had finally unlocked the mythical just war protocol. Others claim the Karen had been planning this for centuries and had simply found the perfect weapon, humanity. Both theories fail to answer the real question. Why now? A stolen recording from a damaged scout ship gave a clue. Arya Voss, commander of the Shatterpoint, speaking to Skarneth, the Karen Huntmaster, over an encrypted channel. You waited for us to rise, didn't you? Skarneth responded without pause. Not rise. Prove. The stars are full of predators. But you chose something else. What? To become more than the kill. That clip became the most shared transmission in the Accord's history. Soon after, a shift began. A quiet rebellion. Not against the Alliance, but against the systems the Accord had long accepted. Systems built on exploitation, corruption, and strategic cruelty. Dozens of mid-tier civilizations began re-examining their laws, freeing forced labor sectors, ending predatory trade agreements, decommissioning illegal fleets. Not out of morality, out of terror. Because if they didn't do it themselves, the Alliance might come next. Accord citizens, however, were split. Some saw the humans and Icarans as monsters wrapped in moral slogans. Others called them the judgment the galaxy needed. Everywhere they went, the rules changed. And yet, for all the dread they inspired, the Pact never broadcast demands, never issued ultimatums. Their enemies simply fell, or were erased. Sometimes they didn't even destroy. They exposed. The planet Terrene IV, ruled by a proxy military regime, received no attack. Instead, every encrypted comm line was hijacked. Thousands of war crimes were aired planet-wide. Video footage, audio logs, financial records. Within hours, the regime collapsed from inside. A revolution began without a single shot fired by the Pact. A week later, the Shatterpoint was seen leaving orbit. It hadn't fired a single weapon. The galaxy didn't know how to fight that. You can build fleets against guns. You can build shields against plasma. But how do you defend against an idea? Still, the Accord tried to gather intel. Emissaries were dispatched to intercept the Alliance mid-campaign. These were the best negotiators from 11 species, trained in diplomacy, war psychology, even Terran customs. They didn't return. Their vessel was found drifting near a collapsed wormhole. Inside, untouched food, no signs of violence, and one message etched into the pilot's chair. You cannot negotiate with extinction. You can only stop deserving it. The Accord convened again. New emergency orders were drafted. Fleet mobilization began. Quietly, so as not to provoke the Alliance. Meanwhile, a pattern emerged. Every target of the Alliance had committed acts against those who could not fight back. Slavers, bioweapon traffickers, corporate genocidaires, planetary suppressors. No gray zones, only black and white. The galaxy hadn't seen this kind of clarity in centuries. A philosophical crisis began to ripple through the Accord's core worlds. Were they protectors of peace or apologists for corruption? The lines blurred fast. But it was a whisper from a former slave general that reframed the entire war. They don't kill because they want peace, he said. They kill because the rest of us chose not to. That statement turned into a movement. World began issuing public statements condemning past actions, offering reparations to former colonies, expelling old war criminals in exchange for transparency. Not because they were threatened, but because they realized it might be the only thing that would spare them from judgment. And yet, the Alliance remained silent. Not a word of approval, not a sign they were watching, which made it worse, because the galaxy now lived in uncertainty, not knowing if their past sins had earned a target on their skies, not knowing if their efforts to atone would matter, not knowing if silence meant they were safe or already marked. And in that void, the galaxy began to pray, not for mercy, but for a future where the two deadliest species in the galaxy had no reason to look their way again. The liberation of Tarsus Delta should have been a war. For centuries, the high-caste elite ruled the planet from orbital palaces, using surface dwellers as labor beneath poison-filtered skies. Any hint of rebellion was smothered under chemical bombardments. Surveillance drones filled the air like steel wasps. And then one day, Every drone simply fell from the sky. No fleets arrived. No bombardment. Just silence, followed by lights going out sector by sector. The people of Tarsus didn't know who to thank. They didn't even know they were being freed until the lockdown doors opened. Oxygen returned. Power reactivated. Food lines deployed across the outer slums. And then, just as quietly, the Acheran and Human Alliance left. No fanfare. No message. Only a single sentence embedded in the old broadcast tower systems. We remove what you tolerated. The message sparked a fire across neutral systems. It wasn't just power the Alliance was targeting. It was consent. They weren't toppling tyrants for resources or control. They were erasing entire structures of oppression the galaxy had accepted as normal, and doing it without taking anything in return. A respected Concord historian named Veltrinok couldn't stay silent any longer. He traveled to the liberated worlds to see the aftermath for himself. A decade of work undone in days. But what shocked him most wasn't the destruction, it was the rebuilding. Schools reopened. Water purification systems installed. Community-led councils formed. There were no occupying forces. No tribute being funneled back to Earth or a Karen Prime. Only quiet instructions left behind. Manuals written in native languages, giving locals the tools to rebuild their societies. One child on Tarsus called it a ghost gift. Vel's reports shook the Accord to its core. If monsters had done this, what did that make the Accord? Who'd allowed it to stand for generations? The most chilling discovery came from Vel's intercepted recording, a conversation between the Karen Huntmaster and Arya Voss, buried inside an abandoned Virex data node. Skarneth, you did not come to dominate. Why? Arya, because we know what we could become. We've already lived through it. Earth nearly broke itself before it learned control. Skarneth, you forged morality through suffering. Arya, we don't celebrate it, but we remember it. That's the difference. Skarneth, then your species may survive longer than mine. That one conversation reframed the Alliance entirely. It wasn't built on strategy or conquest. It was built on mutual shame and a shared decision to never become what they once were. While fear still pulsed across systems, a different kind of movement took root. Rogue colonies and unaligned planets began forming new regional accords, imitating the Alliance's structure: defense without dominance, protection without profit. Some even offered themselves as neutral shelters for displaced populations from past wars. The Alliance never officially endorsed them, but they never struck them either, and that quiet acknowledgement was enough. The most radical shift came from a group of defectors, former Accord intelligence officers, high-ranking generals, even a few planetary governors. They called themselves the Atone Coalition. With stolen Accord ships and data caches, they joined the Alliance, not to fight, but to offer skills, translations, infrastructure blueprints. Their application was met with a single test: disarm and serve. If they passed, they joined. If not, they vanished. It was during one of the Coalition's reconstruction efforts that the galaxy saw its first public glimpse of a Covenant world, a joint human-Acheran settlement forged from scrap metal and scorched soil. Half jungle, half volcanic ridge, located on a planet too unstable for most species. Yet somehow it thrived. Families of both species walked side by side. Human children learned Acheran survival rights. Acheran youth studied Terran philosophy. No flags flew, no credits exchanged, no superiority declared. And for the first time in generations, aliens began calling the place sacred. To some, it was terrifying. What kind of future could be born in a place like that? One where the weak were protected not because it was profitable, but because it was required? What would that galaxy look like? The Accord began fracturing. Some systems demanded war against the Alliance, arguing that their very existence undermined the old order. But others, especially those once colonized or economically strangled by larger powers, began siding with the Alliance in secret. Trade routes shifted. Defense pacts unraveled. Loyalty to the Accord started to mean shame. An Accord senator from the Grell system resigned publicly. Her final address spread like wildfire. We called them monsters because they didn't ask our permission to stop evil. But we had 1,000 years to fix it. We didn't. They did. That's not monstrous. That's justice. It was the first time in recorded Accord history a resignation was followed by planetary applause. The Accord lost control of nearly 100 systems in under 3 months, not because of military strikes, but because of ideology. The Alliance wasn't offering a better system. They weren't offering anything, and that made it worse, because the galaxy didn't know how to argue with silence. It couldn't fight something that didn't want power, didn't need validation, and didn't care to be understood. Still, pockets of resistance remained. Old power didn't die easily. The Virex Dominion, humiliated and scattered, reassembled what was left of his fleets. Every ship, every resource, every conscript, billions of soldiers, AI-merged destroyers, Starforges reignited. They refused to be a lesson in history. The plan was simple: lure the Alliance into open battle and crush them with overwhelming force. No more surgical strikes. No more hit and fade. This would be total war. The Virex called Operation Iron Sky. Their final message to the Accord was blunt. You wanted peace through fear. We'll give you fear that doesn't pretend. The Accord begged them to reconsider, but pride had already outrun reason. The Virex gathered near the Altherian line, a border region untouched by the Alliance. They believed the humans and Icarans were too moral, too disciplined to strike first. They were wrong, because when the Alliance responded, they didn't come to stop the Virex. They came to end them. The Virex Armada ignited the stars over the Altherian line. They brought everything: Dreadnought-class capital ships, anti-orbital kinetic cannons, planet cracker torpedoes, even gravity distortion shields stolen from black market Lyran tech. The fleet stretched across 8 systems, each ship hardened against electronic warfare, psychic disruption, and EMP surges. Billions of troops lined up, indoctrinated, enhanced, and fanatical. This wasn't a deterrent. This was a statement. The Virex believed they had baited the Alliance into overreaching, into hubris, into arrogance. But the first sign of the counterattack wasn't a ship. It was a sudden, simultaneous death of time. Across every Virex command ship, internal clocks stopped. Gravity flickered. Engines stalled mid-burn. AI cores locked into recursive loops, replaying childhood memories of their creators. Crew members looked around, unsure if they had died, or if death simply hadn't noticed them yet. Then, the shadows arrived. Human stealth frigates, previously considered theoretical, emerged from gravitational folds. Not warp lanes, not jumps. They folded in, skipping physics entirely. Entire wings of Virex destroyers simply ceased functioning. Their systems didn't explode. They gave up. Fire control software turned off targeting. Missile bays sealed. Oxygen-flooded containment zones. Then came the Karen. They didn't come from space. They came from inside the ships. Months before the Virex had even begun Operation Iron Sky, the Karen had already infiltrated their industrial chains, their supply lines, even their shipyards. Every 10 crew member on the capital ships was not a Virex officer, but a fully trained Karen infiltrator in disguise. When the signal came, the Karen uncoiled from within their ranks, disabling reactors, carving through command nodes, leaving officers disarmed, never dead unless forced. It wasn't a battle. It was a conclusion. The largest ship in the Virex fleet, the Final Creed, was pulled into the gravity well of a gas giant, not by force, but by surrender. The crew detonated their own engines to avoid being taken alive. Only one pod escaped, containing a single general, blind from neural backlash, babbling about voices that knew his name before he spoke it. When Accord forces arrived days later to investigate, all they found were husks. Not even wreckage. Just hollow vessels left in orbit, communications wiped, AI burned clean. The galaxy's second largest military power had evaporated in less than 7 hours. The Shatterpoint never fired a single weapon. A lone message, sent system-wide and translated into every known galactic dialect, followed. We do not seek your surrender. We seek your change. If you refuse, we leave you to your ruin. For the first time in known galactic history, silence replaced war. And it was everywhere. Former warlords issued mass pardons and exiled themselves. Planets known for authoritarian regimes restructured their entire governments overnight. Distant border empires issued public apologies. The concept of revenge, once institutionalized, was quietly removed from military doctrine across 47 species. On the burned worlds the Alliance had passed through, something else began to grow. Not fear, but mimicry. Communities began adopting Acheran honor rituals. They tattooed oaths across their arms like human marines. Schools began teaching Terran ethical debates alongside mathematics. Young leaders referenced Arya Voss like a philosopher, not a war commander. And in the far reaches, a myth began that humanity and Acheran hadn't just formed an alliance. They had become one force. A new evolutionary answer to the galaxy's oldest question. What happens when power chooses not to dominate, but to uplift or erase? Some feared the answer. Others wept for it. Inside the hidden Alliance colony, now called Hearthspire by its inhabitants, Scarnet's episode Arya under the double sunset of a planet once marked as inhospitable to all sentient life. Now, it hosted over 1 million residents from across 20 species. She handed him a data slate. Images of colonies rebuilt, where criminals turned farmers, broken systems now mending themselves. You think they'll hold to it? She asked. Scarnet stared long, silent, then answered, Some will. And the others? They will remember. There were no monuments built, no treaties signed, no galactic holiday declared. But the galaxy began to orbit a new understanding. You could not bargain with the Alliance. You could not intimidate them. You could not bribe, distract, or manipulate them. You could only deserve their absence. Years passed. No new strikes came. No warnings. No sightings. But every empire, every fleet, every planetary ruler kept one thing in common. Somewhere, buried deep in emergency protocol, written into their survival doctrine, was a quiet clause. If the kindred return, kneel. And the galaxy knelt by reforming itself. Terran historians called it the Silence Doctrine. Acheran lore keepers called it the Era of Measured Blades. But for most species, it had no name, only a shared emotion. Not peace, but awe. And behind that awe, a persistent electric tension. Because while Earth and Acheran Prime made no demands, gave no instructions, and claimed no territories, the galaxy knew the truth. They were still watching, not from the center, not from above, but from the quiet edges, waiting not to rule, but to judge. The final line of the last intercepted transmission, originating from deep in a collapsed wormhole chain. Read only this. The next where you start may not end with survival. It may end with understanding. Choose carefully. And so the galaxy did, because it remembered what happened the last time the two deadliest species met, and chose each other.